From March 1 to March 3, Auroville hosted the second Global Spirituality Mahotsav, organized by the Auroville Foundation in collaboration with the Government of Puducherry and the Ministry of Culture. The event marked the culmination of the 150th birth anniversary celebrations of Shri Aurobindo. The Mahotsav was themed Realizing Shri Aurobindo's 5 Dreams for a New Humanity, revisiting a vision articulated by Shri Aurobindo on the eve of India's independence. The vision centers on freedom, unity, spiritual awakening, and the evolutionary progress of mankind. Founded on February 28, 1968 by Mira Alfaza, known as the Mother, Auroville was conceived as a universal township where people from across the world could live in harmony beyond the boundaries of religion, politics, and nationality. The week spoke to Jayanti S Ravi, Secretary of the Auroville Foundation, who reflected on the teachings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, and the objectives behind organizing the 2026 Global Spirituality Mahotsav.
Years since Shri Aurobindo's dream, vision was articulated on the eve of independence. So, at the moment, where do we stand?
So his dream, actually, it's more than 70 years because it actually happened that these dreams coincided with the day that India got independence, which also coincided, which he says with great humility, with the day of his birthday. There's a lot of significance that the ashram and Sri Aurobindo, originally laid to birthdays. They say that's the day that you actually, it's a birth of a new level of consciousness in you, so to say, to be moving closer to your journey to realize your true aim of life. So on that very special day, 15th August 1947, he talks of 5 dreams, and it was telecast on All India Radio, Tiruchirappalli. Of course, it was broadcast by a broadcaster. We do not have any recorded voice, voice recordings of Shri Aurobindo available. We've tried hard. Ashram, nobody has any of it there. So this is what we had. His word is very powerful. So he talks of 5 dreams. So the 5 dreams of Shri Aurobindo, the first is of a free and united India. He doesn't mince words. Not only had India got her freedom, but he says that this kind of a partition of India is not something that he said is acceptable. And he also said that it is a certitude. He uses a kind of emphatic certainty to say that this partition will also eventually go, to say that India will become the Akhand Bharat. He has actually said that. The second dream was of a resurgent Asia. He said that Asia has a very important role because if you see till then, the World War I, II, all of it, Europe was more the nucleus of a lot of things happening, and America. So he talks about the resurgence of Asia, and there too India has a special position. And the third gift that he refers to is which is so very relevant now. He calls it the spiritual gift of India to the world. And today when we see the kind of turbulence the world is going to, whether it's all these multilateral organizations which almost seem to have become irrelevant in today's context. And also when there is conflict, we look at the Middle East, other parts of the world, and when there is, in spite of having enough, we still have starvation, we still have problems of conflicts, deaths, illnesses, diseases, medicines available, but then people not having the access to it. All these things. So it means that increasingly it makes us realize that just working from the level of the intellect, he speaks of different levels of evolution, and he says just an intellectual solving of the problems will not, and more it's evident that's not happening. So he spoke of India's spiritual gift to the world, to say that not merely a logical, he said the mind and the intellect is a very useful and very good instrument, but there's something beyond the mind, and that is what is, the basis of what he says is a supramental level or consciousness, do things with consciousness. And so he, in today's context, you feel that even with AI, all of this which is ML, which is taking over, if you look at a very stereotypical approach to solving problems of the world, you may find that you're almost hitting a dead end. And therefore, what is it new that can come? It is India which has to lead the way to say that not just by a very, very perfunctory equality, which was the basis of communism, or very perfunctory liberty to say that it's a free-for-all, market forces, you can do what you like. But the third part of these three words called liberty, equality, and fraternity, where it's that brotherhood. You can have differences because culturally we're not all uniform beings. Culturally, maybe a person from Sweden will have different cultural practices from a person from India and from Africa. We are different, but in that difference, there's still a great deal of fraternity, a oneness, and which is what is the basis of the Vedic religions. He called it the secret of the Vedas, to say that it's that same divinity in you, me, in everything, and therefore how can we be different from each other? So there is that inherent oneness. The fourth dream that he spoke of is a new world union. So we also see all these new configurations that are happening. The EU, the trade union, this whole thing, initially it was a bipolar world, became more and more a unipolar world, and now with all this confusion that's prevailing, the kind of turbulence, point of inflection, you see that this reason to again realize that we have to all be united, a new world union, the way EU and India, so many countries, the kind of stature and status that Bharat is also now getting across time, with the kind of approach India has also had historically and even more pronounced now in having that great approach of friendship with everybody, and yet trying to speak about her own ancient heritage and with the modernity progress that is needed, how the two can be synthesized, ancient values with progress, modernism, researches, and so on. And fifth dream that he spoke of is something which is what in a way Auroville was meant for, to be a cradle for the evolution of a new species. What he essentially said is, even if you went by the Darwinian theory, he says that human being or man it's not as if you are the final full stop on evolution. We are still evolving species. And he says that the next evolution would be somebody who is not predominantly guided just by cold or hard intellectual logic, arguments, for and against and so on, but something which is beyond that, which is more unifying. So that is the fifth dream, that if we get a critical mass of people who become almost like voluntary guinea pigs, if I can use that word, voluntary, they call it, something like willing servitors of allowing this evolutionary process to happen at an accelerated pace. Because this has happened across mankind. You do see human beings who have been really evolved, been able to, not by money power, muscle power, or all those things, not by, but by just their power of presence and consciousness, they've been able to really touch the lives of many and transform them. So he says, instead of that being isolated islands of happening, can you have a coalescing of it into a critical mass where people can be? And that is what Auroville was set up as, a city of consciousness. So these are the 5 dreams of Sri Aurobindo: a free and united India, a resurgent Asia, a new world union, India's gift of spirituality to the world, and the evolution of a new consciousness.
Each time we mention about Sri Aurobindo, ma'am, we also talk about the mother. Mother took it forward after Sri Aurobindo left his body. So, what was the kind of bonding between them? And how does mother take forward? How did mother take forward Aurobindo's legacy?
So if you see Sri Aurobindo and the mother, I think they both, the right word to probably describe them is they were spiritual collaborators. So in some way, when he came after a certain point, he became somebody who was completely moved, who had moved inward. Of course, the kind of work he was doing within the planes of consciousness, he was writing all his books with a kind of great, speed with which he was writing and the kind of thoughts that were coming. But she was the one who was actually implementing most of these things. If you see the ashram, they had more than 100 units. Even this idea of implementing Auroville, he spoke about an Auroville-like community in his book Life Divine. He talks about something called Gnostic communities as against agnostic. So she's the one but who founded it at the age of she was almost 90 when she founded this in 1968. So I think both of them had a very important role. He was in some ways the fountainhead of thought, direct action, and she was the fountainhead of implementation, but both of them had that intrinsic oneness which was so powerful, and which is something which has really withstood the ravages of time and space. And somebody who had been completely cut off from India or anything which was Bharatiya by his father. He was sent to England at a very young age, and his father didn't even want, this is I'm talking of Sri Aurobindo, didn't even want the shadow of Indianness or Indian culture to fall on his son, because he was a great Anglophile. But when he came back to Baroda, to India, and he was employed or given in a position by the then Maharaja Sayaji Rao Gaikwad at Maharaja today's MS University at Baroda, it is believed that with a vengeance, this need, it just grew from within him, the need to, completely, the great appetite to, to eat up everything and anything he could find on India, to really understand it. He mastered so many languages, Bangla, Sanskrit. Of course, he knew most of the European languages, Indian scriptures, and then when he came to Pondicherry, he also learned Tamil. He's translated Andal, interacted with Subramanya Bharati, and he was a thorough rationalist. You see, he was not somebody who was not a rationalist. I think he was a thorough rationalist. But being a rationalist, rationalism doesn't give you the arrogance to believe that everything else does not exist. With rationality also comes that complete humility, where you realize the limits of rationalization or rationality. So that is what he realized, the limit of rationality, and said that if you really try to solve the problems of mankind or the larger universal problems, or even the individual problems of psychology, man to man, person to person, what are the dynamics of human nature, you cannot solve it just by the mind or cold logic or rational approach alone. And that is why he says you have to go beyond that. And he also wrote a very, very beautiful tiny book. I would like to sometimes share it or even show it. It's not here with me. But he was also what is called a Shakta, somebody who was a great believer in the feminine, the mother, the universal mother. And he actually also goes on to say that the mother, the spiritual collaborator of Shri Aurobindo, is indeed the universal mother. And he also talks of 4 aspects of this divine mother. Maheshwari, who's the embodiment of knowledge. Mahakali, the embodiment of courage. I'm giving it in a very pithy way. Mahalakshmi, who's the embodiment of, harmony, negotiation, all those attributes which are about prosperity, abundance, beauty, aesthetics. And Mahasaraswati. Mahasaraswati is the embodiment of perfection, skill, accuracy, work, all of these. So he gave a lot of importance to the all-rounded dimensions, all these dimensions of human beings, and also of the universal mother. And mother is something that, whatever be our gender, we all hold that little spark of the divine, which can be likened to the divine mother. It's a spot of the mother. So all these attributes, and that is where he talks of a wholesome person, who's not just a unidimensional, somebody who's only good at the mental level or the physical, whether it's the body or aesthetics, art, culture, so he really spoke of an integral human being, and therefore integral education, where all the dimensions of the being, the physical, the emotions, the vital dimension, the intellectual dimension, the mind, and of course something that he calls the psychic dimension, which is beyond all of this, which holds all this together, but bathed, anchored, and aspiring towards the highest consciousness is what he gave as the aim of life.
So let's get started today. It is the second Global Spirituality Mahotsav. What are you aiming at with this, and will this be an annual affair from here on?
So this is the Global Spirituality Mahotsav 2026. The first one was held about 2 years ago. So I wouldn't know how frequently it can happen or will happen, of course, but I think the event, even if it were to happen once in a year, once in 2 years, what is more important is that this understanding, deliberations, understanding, and a lot of young people across India and the world who find that, they're supremely bright, very, very accomplished, but what is also very heartening is that a lot of them are very authentic. They're very sincere in what they do, but they also see the futility of the way some of these things are panning out in the world. You see battles in corporate boardrooms, or even the kind of political, the kind of conflicts you have. So they find that there's a kind of, they're questioning the way the world is dealing with all these issues currently. So you need something like a breath of fresh air or something different. And I think in that sense, this whole Global Spirituality Mahotsav gives us a bit of it's like a little bit of a shake-up or a place for us to stop, pause, reflect, and see what is it that in all this turbulence that we see around us, how can we try to make this life really divine and beautiful, not waiting for life after death, but you can actually bring that divinity here if only we were to work on the inside, not to the exclusion of outside. So Shri Aurobindo that way is very, very inclusive. He doesn't speak of, giving up everything and being wedded to poverty. He actually says we have to have, Aishwarya of all kinds, which means aesthetics, abundance, prosperity, beauty, money, but all this to be anchored in consciousness. So how is it that we can really have all-rounded expansion and all-rounded prosperity?
Thank you.